Somebody like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Huff, are there any members of the public?
No members of the public.
The traffic continues to keep them from attending. Okay. Let's jump right to the consent agenda. All we have in the consent agenda are minutes from our meeting way back in July. A moment to take a look. Entertain a motion to accept the minutes. Motion by Mr. Beal, second.
Second.
By Ms. Caldarelli. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Let's jump right into member committee updates, community meetings. Probably not many happened over the summer. I know my Civic Association, Rosemont, has a meeting tomorrow night. They're getting back into the swing of it. Anybody else? Anybody with their community? Anyway, as we get back into the fall season, I encourage you to connect back up with your civic associations if you can. Finance and Audit Committee, anything, Mr. Jinks? Well, got something coming up.
Well, the audit is in process. And you have draft audit in Europe. So everything will go smoothly and okay.
We had a very busy meeting yesterday and a lot of work leading up to it from the governance committee. Mr. Beal, would you like to give an update?
Yes, I want to thank all of the board members for being present last night. We appreciated the input. We discussed the self-assessment survey. It gives us a number of things to think about working up for our board retreat. We also looked at new board policies, updates to policies, and 2 new board policies. The committee approved updates to board roles and responsibilities and the ethics policies, and approved a new board member orientation policy. We deferred the new policies on committees, financial, which will incorporate write-off policies and environmental justice for a later date. We also had a presentation from Sally McGee, who is going to be the facilitator for the board retreat. Like to, is it appropriate at this point to move the approval of the updated policies on board roles and responsibilities and ethics and the new board member orientation policy?
It is appropriate and welcome. There is a second.
Second.
Before we do, Ms. Hammer, would you like to add anything? Nope. Okay, so we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
So we have approved new policies. I see our general manager smiling because we generally have not updated policies in a while, and we're starting to chip away at it. This is good news. And good work by the committee.
I want to thank staff and council for all their work on this. I know it's been a lot to do, so it's a good effort. Thank you.
Right. Jumping right ahead to unfinished business, there actually is one piece of unfinished business, if I could just insert it. With our new board members, we've made some reassignment to committees, and I just want to read it into the record that our Finance and Audit Committee is now comprised of Mr. Jenks and Ms. Caldarelli. And governance is Mr. Beal and Ms. Hammer. And we're ably staffed on both of our committees, so that's good news. And jumping right ahead to new business, and we're way ahead of schedule, is a discussion of affordability. And let me preface this discussion to say this is an educational segment. affordability is a big issue both in Alexandria and across the nation in the water sector. And it's an issue that we will be wrestling with in the future. Before we even think about policies or think about programs, let's learn all the background and context that we can. And I have to say, I have previewed this presentation a little bit with Mr. Carl, and it really is very rich in content. So we've got a lot of time tonight to go over it. But again, the purpose tonight is not to decide on anything or propose anything, but rather to learn. And so I encourage every board member and others, if you have a question, raise your hand, ask a question, because there's a lot of content here. And the more you know, the better, when we ultimately get around to designing something, the better that something will be. So, Mr. Carl, let's start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. I just want to take a moment to introduce staff to the board. I know Ms. Hammer hasn't met everybody yet. But I'd like to start with you. Just go ahead and introduce yourself and your role, and we'll work back to Kelvin and.
Yes, Lake Akintube, Director of Finance, been with the organization now for about 8 months.
Good afternoon, Diana Ling. I'm with Raftalis, and I've been able to be part of the rate setting process and financial assistance with these projects for about 2 years now.
Hi, Terry Bover with Raftalis. I've been working with AlexRenew since about 2007, related to financial planning. And, we have definitely a big interest our firm does in customer assistance programs around the country, and we help others with those. So we're happy to be a part of tonight's discussion and supporting it.
Hi, everyone. Matt Robertson. I'm Director of Communications, also overseeing customer service.
Good evening. I'm Allison Dinas. I'm the Chief Water Quality Officer here.
And I'm Kelvin Coles, the AlexRenew Program Manager, and I've been working with and for AlexRenew since 2018.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Hill. I think tonight is really setting a foundation for affordability and setting us up for future discussions. After we got through budget, we made a commitment to the board that we'd circle back on affordability to have a greater discussion. We wanted to do this outside of our board retreat because we want to focus our board retreat really on developing the vision and outcomes for the board. And likely what will happen is we'll have these discussions throughout the next few board meetings until we get to a point of a resolution on affordability. So tonight's just to kick off. I will call this a PowerPoint full of pie charts. So you can only show data so many ways, but we tried to do it as in a way that was, visual and appealing. So pie charts are throughout. So tonight's presentation really is focused around, you want to just go forward, Mark?
You'll try again.
Just go ahead forward. You. Back one. All right, so tonight's discussion really is, we're going to define affordability. Talk about what drives AlexRenew's sewer rates. Talk about the clean water costs in Alexandria, and we're going to really look forward to 2026 when revenue is complete. We're going to put the framework around 2026, not necessarily today. Compare our costs nationally, those 2026 numbers with today's numbers. Terry can go through and give you a little insight to do some math to project the NACWA numbers. Look at current programs that we do at AlexRenew that Virginia American Water does and the city does to support affordability. Take a deep dive on delinquencies, because we know there's a bunch of questions around delinquencies. We're going to go back to 2016 and show you data from 2016 to today. And then we're going to end the discussion with some ideas that we've come up with as staff to potentially create an affordability program or a fund to help fund affordability in Alexandria, and then compare that with what some other local municipalities are doing around affordability. So I guess first off, you know, we spent a lot of time on this deck. We spent a lot of time on this slide. What is affordability? Affordability is a measure of an individual's ability to afford an expense. So what we want to see is income balanced with expenses: housing, technology, healthcare, utilities like our sewer bill, food, childcare, and taxes. And that grouping is going to come up later in a discussion when we talk about ALICE and kind of look at pie charts on how that looks for affordability here in Alexandria, not just for a family, but also for a one-person household and a senior household. One thing to note about affordability is it is community specific as well, so that the discussion around affordability in Alexandria, you know, is community specific. Just, we always start these presentations with an overview of AlexRenew. I think it's important to note some of these bullets on here because they do set the structure around how we can manage rates. We are an independent political subdivision. There is a memo that Mr. Jinks wrote in our response outlining having the ability to do variable rates to our customers. We are guided by VWWA. We're a single, our mission is established by VWWAA as a single purpose utility to manage wastewater in Alexandria and parts of Fairfax County. We're distinct and separate from the city, governed by this 5-member citizen board. And right now, you know, our investments in our plant over the last 20 to 30 years have really been driven by the Chesapeake Bay requirements, which we're approaching that sunset date for the Bay goals in 2028. We manage flow from about 27,000 accounts in Alexandria. 26,710 is our current number based on our data. And we also provide wholesale service to Fairfax County, and we fully recover our costs through rates. Just looking at our service area in 2026, our service area is shown here in green. Alexandria is outlined in purple. Really, our main assets are our wastewater treatment plant, 4 interceptors that are served by 5 pumping stations. Innovation District pumping station is being brought online now. We'll likely take over that pump station in October. That deliver flow down to our wastewater plant. And then you can see the investment in AlexRenew in yellow, the Host Run Interceptor, the waterfront tunnel, and the various diversion facilities. So those are our assets in 2026, totaling around $1 billion is our estimate for our assets and what we own in 2026. So what impacts our rates and charges? We've kind of put these into 4 main buckets. I mentioned the regulatory drivers like the Chesapeake Bay program. We have process upgrades based on that nutrient removal. Our nutrient removal right now for nitrogen is 3 milligrams per liter and phosphorus is 0.18. We have various laws and TMDLs, 2017 CSO law, Hunting Creek TMDL. R2 is one TMDL that we have to meet. We have climate resiliency requirements, our financial oversight requirements, and then we've had large investments in cybersecurity over the past few years for the organization and to meet some of those EPA targets. On the employee side, we've got compensation, benefits, cost of living, salaries, training and licensing, and then additional staffing as we need to bring staff on to support the organization. Inflation is something we've discussed a lot in the last year. Fortunately, we're coming on the downtrend of unprecedented inflation, and that impacts our construction costs, but it also impacts our utilities and chemicals as noted in our budget planning process this year. Contracted service and then overall impacts our overall capital costs. And then growth. Innovation District Pump Station is one example of growth in the city of Alexandria to support the Virginia Tech campus. A new pumping station was constructed to deliver about 2 MGD to AlexRenew. AlexRenew will take over that pump station. It was constructed by Clark and JVG. We expect to see flow changes and load changes. Over the past 20 years, wastewater has gotten less dilute because of low flow fixtures, but we also anticipate there be flow changes as development ramps up in the city and also in the county. And then, as I mentioned, new assets like the Innovation District pumping station. So this is the slide we start with every year to talk about rates and charges. These are the board tenets. These are what guide our decisions around setting rates and charges for AlexRenew, for our utility. And some of these are defined by our master indenture of trust, but also our financial policy that we kind of took a look at specific pieces of last night. Our tenets are to operate a fiscally stable and sustainable utility, cover our costs via rates, be transparent in our reporting to the public. Those are our budget meetings that we hold publicly every year. All of our meetings are discussed and our budget is discussed publicly at our board meetings. We do have payment plans and flexibility in payment plans. We'll dive into that a little bit later. We have our master indenture of trust and loan documents that we require compliance with, and then our board adopted financial policies. All right, so getting into the details of cost of clean water, we're looking at the city as a whole. We're not just looking at AlexRenew on this side. So I'll start at the bottom and work my way up. You all have copies of this at your desk if you need to make notes. So at the bottom, we're showing the cost for AlexRenew wastewater charges. That includes our interceptors, our pumping systems, wastewater plant, and charges associated with AlexRenew. We estimate those charges in 2026 based on our current budget and 10-year CIP of around $700 per year. I do want to make note that this hatched area, to about 240 of that, this is for 4,000 gallons of use per month. So it's typically a family of four using 4,000 gallons. That's usually how we show our rates. About 240 of that yearly expense is attributed solely to AlexRenew and the investment we're making now. Moving up, the water drop is the city stormwater fee. That is a tax on property administered by the city of Alexandria. So that's another piece of the one water cost in Alexandria. Going up, the next one is potable water, drinking water, Virginia American Water, $358 per year. And at the very top is the city's sanitary sewer fee. I think it's based on $228 per 1,000 gallons, and that's about $109 a year. And that total on water costs in 2026, we're going to show this in the next few slides, is about $1,500. That's for the cost of all water services in Alexandria, that a resident or a family using 4,000 gallons per month will pay.
Sorry, quick question. The 240 that's attributed to AlexRenew, in theory, that drops off once the financing, that 30-year financing or whatever, or is it just built in?
It's built in.
Okay.
Yeah. So the next 45 years, we'll see that. It'll plateau here in 2028. Right. Fiscal year 2028, 2027, 2028 plateau with that around $20 a month additional fee on top of. We're having this discussion at a pretty unique time, and I'm glad we were able to time this presentation with the September meeting. Because as you all know, we've discussed, the city is also having an affordable housing discussion around the same time. About a week and a half ago, the city rolled out their affordable housing plan, and there's discussions right now happening in the community about affordable housing. That's pretty helpful because we can look at their information they're using and help us inform our presentation for this evening. They're looking a lot at the American Community Survey from the 5-year census from 20. So a lot of these numbers I'm going to show from 2017 to 2021 is average 5 years looking at the census data. And it's informative to us too, because I think we talk a lot about a user of 4,000 gallons per month. But when you look at Alexandria, 43% of those households are one-person households. I think that was news to us, kind of looking at this and maybe a different way for us to think about our rate structure and how we're presenting rates moving forward. So just starting off here on the left, about 72,224 households in Alexandria. This is based on census data. 43% are owner occupied. The remainder, 57%, are renter occupied. You can look at some of the city's data. It matches this data as well. We try to align it as much as humanly possible. 43% are one-person households. 20% of the households have a member 65 or older. 20% have children under 18, and then the average household size is about 2.1. I think when we look through the data too, we're looking at a family with greater than 3 people. That number is under 8,000. You know, when we think about looking at all of these households, 8,000 of them are families using around 4,000 gallons a month. So that was something that stuck with us and staff as we went through the presentation and prepared for this evening's meeting, starting to maybe look more about what it costs for a one-person household in addition to our 4,000 gallons a month. We do have the website where you can go in and calculate your bill, but it's nice for us to know that number offhand as well. And we'll show that a little bit later.
You repeat that. So of the 72,000 households, like 8,000
Yes,
are in fact our average,
plus 3. Yes, families 3 plus.
or 4,000 gallon average.
That's found that shocking when we went through the data. It was surprising to us to see that. And it makes sense when you go back and look at how many households are one-person households. Almost half.
You know what the population total is for those? Because
I know the total, it's 158. I don't remember what the population was for those households. But I mean, it's easy to find on the census website.
I think it would also be good to see in 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, because 1 and then 3 averages are kind of 1 foot hot water, 1 foot cold water, and you're right. It's averaged out, doesn't mean much. So I think seeing the array of data is important.
Once you learned how to use that website, it was deadly. All right, you see people use living wage for data. We initially used living wage in 2018 when we first started discussing AlexRenew around rates and affordability in Alexandria. I think when Allison started here, she suggested that we start looking towards Alice to start to look at affordability and what it costs to live here in Alexandria. So all of the data we're going to present has come from United for Alice, and Alice stands for asset limited, income constrained, and employed. And then we look at Alexandria from an Alice standpoint. 63% of Alexandrians are above the Alice threshold. 9%, 10% are in poverty, and then we have 27% that are considered Alice. And those are the group of households that are on the brink of being pushed one way or another based on affordability and the pie charts we're going to look at in the next few slides. When you compare Alexandria to Virginia, we're relatively close, 10%, 28% Virginia are Alice. Median household income in Alexandria is about 101,000 per year. Virginia, 80,000 nationally, just under 70,000. That national number did not come from Alice. We pulled that from the census data. And then in the United States, when you look at Alice, poverty rates around 13% and then 29% for Alice. So it's just something for comparison purposes to show how Alexandria fits into the Alice report.
How do you determine if somebody falls in the Alice category? Is it based on an income here in Alexandria?
Yes. So we're going to go through 3 examples of what those incomes are and what the Alice threshold would be. So here comes our second pie chart. All right. So we started with this is our typical customer, as we talked with AlexRenew in the past, and we're showing on the left, Alice gives you the requirements for living in Alexandria based on that affordability balance we showed in the beginning of the presentation. It gives you a basic household survival budget. This is a 2-adult household with 2 children in daycare. Your basic household survival budget is $107,544. So below that, you'd be kicked into the Alice category. Above that, you would be out of the Alice category. What that means for hourly wages is about $54 an hour. Now, when we start looking at the data from Alice, and we look at the various expenses throughout, this is the yearly expenses. For a family of 4, childcare is the most expensive at about $27,000 per year. That is more than housing, which is about $26,500 per year. Taxes, food, healthcare, miscellaneous, and Alice defines miscellaneous as one-time unanticipated costs you have to expend during that period. Transportation, utilities, technology, and then out of the utilities, we broke out our one water cost. We left the stormwater fee and taxes, and then looked at the wastewater cost, which I mentioned in 2026 is around $700 per month. And then the other clean water, which is your potable water, and your city fee is around $480 per month. So when you look at a 2-adult household with two children in childcare, you're at less than 1% of that household budget for wastewater.
The pie slice that you call utilities, that's really other utilities other than water.
Yeah, so what Alice does is they give you a utility piece. What we did is we took that utility piece and took out our water, and other clean water, and made it separate. So it's reduced from, if you go look at Alice, you'll have to add up these 3 numbers to get the match the number in the report. And this is 2021 data that we're looking at. Well, it's there because it's a busy pie chart. I think the intent is showing that there are main drivers for cost here. We already know this because the city is looking at affordable housing. Housing, childcare are 2 main drivers for affordability here in Alexandria. That's just a minimum budget, doesn't include any savings. You're just getting by at 107,544. Notice that's higher than median household income. All right, so Ministry had that slide, and then the city came out and had their affordability presentations. We learned some things from the city's presentations, attending those meetings. So we wanted to do the same thing for a 1-person household. And looking at a 1-person household survival budget, it's around $50,000 per year. And in this example, we have a different number for water, wastewater, and other clean water. These are more representative of today's values. We took a couple apartment buildings and tried to do a rough calculation for like a 1 to 2-person household. It's around $353 per month for wastewater, and your other water is around $200 per month. And when you look at this pie chart, the main driver for a 1-person household, not surprising, almost half of that goes towards housing, which goes back to the city's presentations recently on affordable housing. The remainder going to taxes, food, miscellaneous healthcare, and then utilities. We're a subset of those utilities at around $350 per month for wastewater. The third example we did were senior household. So this is a 2 senior adult household, basic survival budget around $75,000 per year. And as you can see here, the city does have a program for affordable senior housing. Half of that, or a little less than half of that, about $47,000 per year, goes towards housing. We left the numbers the same for wastewater and other clean water as a representation. They're not exact, but they're relatively close for what a 2 senior household would use. But really, housing, healthcare, and taxes and food are the main expenses for the 2 senior households. Very similar to the others without the chart for.
So
This housing number is dramatically higher than the 2 adults with 2 kids. Why is that? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I mean, when you pull the data from Alex, that's,
Range. I mean, like, it's almost twice as high.
if you go back to the one person more.
One person was along the same lines as
Right.
the 4 person.
We could double, triple check it, but
But there's a system.
Assisted living.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Protect your voice. That's a good point. So that's round one of pie charts. I think the takeaway from this is nothing in here is new. We're a relatively small part of the annual cost. So when we think about affordability, when we think about affordability as a whole in Alexandria, the goal is to make an impact, right? The goal is to make an impact as a whole. And right now, we're less than 1% of the overall budget. This is, again, looking ahead to 2026.
Carl, I would disagree with that conclusion. I think that if somebody is stressed, every dollar they save, regardless of where that dollar comes from, gets them better to be able to afford housing or child. Now, we did something, we can't make a huge difference, but is the city waived the stormwater and the stormwater fee in regard for houses that of households which qualify at an income basis for real estate tax relief. It wasn't a big dollar amount then, and the city thought it was important.
I also think that the pie chart kind of obscures a lot of cases that are at the lower end of the income spectrum. Like, for example, the 2 adult household with 2 children in childcare. I think, a lot of families can't afford childcare. So maybe the one parent is staying home with the kids, or they have a family member watching the kids. And so, take that out of the pie. Okay, wastewater looks like a bigger chunk. Maybe they're renting, they aren't paying $21,000 in taxes. I think that this is, I think that there are ways to present this data. There's a lot of different ways, different slices of the population that would look very different if you leave this pie chart. So it's good context.
I would agree with all of that. However, we have to run the plan. And my concern when I hear things, because I'm from the stormwater world, so, when people talk about how expensive it is to stormwater fees are, and that we're going to drop the stormwater fees, well, all that really does is strangle whoever's trying to meet regulations, right? So while this is important and we need to be affordable, we also have to remember it's expensive to clean water, and the only way we can run this plant is through our rates. So I'm all for trying to make it affordable as we can and try to make it equitable, but at the end of the day, we have a plant to run and we have stuff we have to meet. So that always, I think, has to kind of be our driving force.
You keep in mind, we're not designing a program yet.
Right,
We're
of course.
we're absorbing a lot of data. Plenty more to come.
And I think to Ms. Hammer's point, we do get into some of the data for the 150 percentile households and show you what that number is, and kind of put that in context too for what that value is per month. So we're just kind of going through the information.
Okay.
I think, again, having the information in context, we showed the graph on the left, again, a lot of pie charts as part of our planning for this year and showing where our flows come. Majority of our flow, think about our plant, how capital programs get funded here, 60% Fairfax, 40% Alex only. A lot of our flows are coming in through Fairfax County as a wholesale customer. The next area of flows is coming through our commercial and multifamily units, followed by single family residential, followed by industrial. So that's kind of our flow breakdown. When you look at that in terms of our customers, I think I said the number 26,710. We have customers around 24,000 that receive their bills directly from AlexRenew. The remaining 68% are behind a multimeter, just like the building behind us, and they do not receive a bill from AlexRenew. So it goes back into the bill is managed by a property manager, property owner, managed through a multimeter. So those are customers who don't see us. We talked about that last night. They also don't receive a bill from the organization. It might be built into their rent or some other structure with their property manager.
Are we looked at splitting up the commercial and the multifamily, or is that just the way that we did it through the billing?
It's on the horizon to go back and look at the commercial account, something we've discussed when I first started with Terry and Diana, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. It was on the docket to do. But no, it's not currently. How many customer classes do we have? Do you remember commercial?
4. Well, I mean, 3, but that includes other public agency, commercial and industrial. And then there's the residential class. And yeah, we have talked about it, but in the past, some of the constraints have been related to Virginia American Water and the availability of the billing data to be able to make that differentiation. So we would have to probably go out and characterize all the billing data, potentially ourselves as an agency in order to know who was, which conceivably wouldn't be that hard considering, that the commercial class as a whole is something like 4,000 counts or less. And those that might be within that multifamily class could be, several hundred or so, particularly like the larger ones. So I think it's potentially there. We've talked about it in the past. It's just not something that there's been some limitations with the billing data.
I think another thing, the data tabs, another get also on the multifamily property managers to be an account of how many pass through utility costs their tenants.
Yes.
City housing staff says more than half of it's usually the larger apartment complexes pass through to tenants, so it doesn't get put in their rent. They get a separate bill for electricity, gas, water, and so they are paying. Some portion are paying through the bill to the multifamily property manager or owner. They are paying directly our fee.
And everybody being patient till the end. We're not the only utility in the world that operates this way. It's not abnormal. DC Water is a good example of a utility that has a lot of multifamily units as well.
I guess the reason that I'm asking is if we're looking at affordability, I'm assuming we're going to be focusing on affordability for residents as opposed to businesses, at least in the beginning. And so that could impact things presumably if we're lumping everything together.
Interesting how the data on page 14 correlates with the data on page 9. I don't want you to flip that, but. Family. It lines up very close.
Yeah.
Within 10 percentage points.
Is it the donut chart?
Yeah, the purple donut chart.
Yeah.
43% of our households are one person, 53% are owner occupied. 58%
And I did look up all of, I think Mr. Jinx's question earlier about the persons per household, about 11% at 3 persons per household, about 11% at 4 persons per household or more, 34% at 2 persons per household, and 44% roughly at 1 person per household. This is a breakdown within Alexandria.
What did you say the 2% was?
So for 2 person, it's about 34%. So 2 persons per household is 34% of the households. Now that was based on the 1-year survey. The 5 years is a little bit more accurate, has a lower margin of error, but roughly speaking.
Speaking of these 2 slides, that's made me go back. So the slide 9 says that 43% of households are owner occupied. And this one says only 32% of households directly receive a bill. So in the 11% of owner occupied housing that don't directly receive a bill, is that
Could be
like condos?
with multimeter.
Okay.
Or like a small condo building with a multimeter.
Okay.
Something like that.
Got it.
Attributed that to.
And they could be getting a bill like Mr. Jakes was mentioning. It's just that they would probably be receiving that bill from the entity itself and not AlexRenew. So, you know, we don't have statistics. We don't know. I mean, I believe you take you for value that, you know, there's 50% out there that have that, but we didn't know that information.
It's usually, I'm sorry, it's usually, because that's kind of how I receive my bill. It's usually through a utility servicing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that makes it any easier to get the data or not, probably not, but.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because I was in a situation like that. And I know that the markup sometimes for that services can be as high as 10%. So that in itself can be an issue. But I don't, but yeah, I think, we haven't studied it, so we don't really have too much more to add to the discussion on that. Yes.
All right, I'm going to take a break. Diana's going to come up and give a little overview of how we compare nationally. I think the one thing to note, you know, we looked at a couple indicators for how affordable our rates are. Again, this is information to understand how we compare nationally, and we're comparing ourselves to nationally to other CS utilities that have put together a CSO program. We look at NACA, EPA. So Diana's going to kind of walk through this section, and I'm going to take a break and get some water.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I do not have any pie charts, so that's something to look forward to. As Mr. Carl mentioned, the NACWA, which is the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, is a group of public wastewater and stormwater utilities, and they perform an annual survey benchmarking utilities across the nation. They do this by dividing up the nation into 10 regions, and AlexRenew is within region 3, which represents an average of approximately 17 utilities. And the average reported for 2022 is $664. And this does include increases in sewer charges of approximately 4.5%. And if we take that 4.5% and forecast it into 2026, which is the bill that we have been discussing with the water droplet in earlier slides, that does bring the $664 to approximately $792, which is within 2% of the AlexRenew and city storm charge bill of about $800 that we had in the previous slides. So it does show that AlexRenew is relatively comparable to the utilities within this region by 2026. And something interesting to know is that while the sewer charges, which is represented within the 664, have increased by 4.5%, inflation has increased by 8%. And this does represent a population served of 107 million. This bar chart here represents an average bill, which is the 4,000 gallons monthly charge for a single family residential customer. So you can see Alexandria is towards the bottom of this graph with a little under $60 a month. And it can be seen that Alexandria is comparable. We did asterisk the communities that have largely completed a CSO program. And that can be noted on the side here.
One thing, I'm sorry, the Boston number looks great because they did their CSO program back in the 90s. So they got their program implemented for, a lot cheaper than we did.
Yeah, but the Red Sox aren't doing it.
Did you, I know you said this, but I think I missed it. Within Region 3, what did you say? Do we follow kind of right? Like, do we know what the costs within that region or where we fall?
So within that region, the average bill is $664,
Okay.
which is a survey of 17 utilities within the region. And if we escalate that number to the 2026 number, yes, we're very close. We're within 2%.
Of the average.
And just a minor point of
Average.
clarification, 17, which I quoted you earlier, that was just for Virginia. For the whole of Region 3, which includes Pennsylvania and West Virginia, if all the member respondents participated, it'd be closer to 30 total utilities. So just a point of clarification.
Thank you.
My recollection is correct. We had a bar chart of the DC area as part of our rate discussions. It showed DC water was the highest, Blue was the second highest, and everybody else fell below that.
But I think we're the only two in the region that have CSOs.
To add to Mr. Carl's point on this slide, the timing and the cost of the CSO is a variable within some of these bills that are listed here. Of course, there are other variables within the sewer rates that impact some of these comparables, but that is one very good point regarding this.
Is one of the variables for lack of a better word, cost of living? So I'm looking at West Virginia and Pennsylvania included in that. Presumably it's cheaper to construct things there, or is that the same? Is it just cheaper to live there than it is to construct things there?
Probably more the time, like Justin mentioned, in the case of Boston, you had that, we saw, for example, that over the last 24 months, 2 years or so, that capital costs have gone up 30-40% on bids. So we've seen a pretty steep rise in inflation. It's actually a good thing that AlexRenew was able to hit that timing right before some of that increase to lock in the rates for River Renew, if you can imagine. So that was really good, but cost of living is a factor that does play into it. So you can't dismiss the fact that, to construct here, it's going to be substantially greater because of, the things that you have to deal with that are under the ground and the roadways disruption, things like that, that you may not always encounter those same types of challenges necessarily in some of these other communities. So, the region specific capital costs can vary based on those characteristics for certain.
So that was just kind of an overview of where AlexRenew's bill stands at a national level. Another way of looking at affordability, which is just a different perspective than the ALICE that we spoke in the earlier slides, is the EPA's financial capability assessment. And the EPA came out with this assessment in February of this year. And within that assessment, they established the lowest quintile poverty indicator score, which is a way to calculate and look at affordability within a community. So here, this table illustrates the way that we were able to calculate a score for the city of Alexandria. So looking at different factors within the left column here, different indicators, among which the highest weighted is the upper limit of the lowest quintile. Another way to define this is the 20th percentile of household income, which is approximately 49,000 in the city of Alexandria. And you will see this number in some preceding slides that Mr. Carl will present. And the table if we go from left to right, the way that the calculation is determined is once the weighing is determined, which is set by EPA, the value for the national level is established. And then the value for the city of Alexandria is established, which this data comes from the census. And then wherever the city of Alexandria falls as how close it is to the national value is what score it will receive. So for example, because the city of Alexandria is 25% higher on its quintile income than the national average, it receives a score of 3 for this specific indicator. If it's within very close to the national average, whether it's minus 25% or plus 25%, then it receives a score of 2. And then if it's lower, then it receives a score of 1. So essentially, the higher the score, the better the city stands as compared to the national average. So if you can see here and on the next slide, the score for the city is a 2.9, and the EPA qualifies these scores within 3 buckets: low, medium, and high. The city is within the low impact bucket.
Just one point on this. Sorry, I worked on the development of this guidance. I don't work for EPA, it was an advocacy thing, but this was designed, it's just some important context, I think. This metric was designed to evaluate the capacity of the community to bear costs related to Clean Water Act, like enforcement actions. And it's meant to determine the length of the compliance schedule that the city is given. It doesn't necessarily mean that the city doesn't have affordability challenges. So even though it says low impact, I just think that's important to keep in mind.
And actually, that was going to be one of the talking points, is that it's more of a generalized indicator that's being used. That's okay. It's a generalized indicator used within the industry. And actually, if you're probably familiar too, prior to February of this year, they were still relying on a median household income as a measure, which was highly criticized. And so some of our colleagues were involved in some of the policy considerations to try to get the EPA to consider the lower quintile and some of these other factors in modernizing it. And so because you see folks like the rating agencies that had picked up on that as a measure, it's sort of become a somewhat generalized barometer within the utility rate industry for affordability. But you're absolutely right. You can't use that as an end all be all for assessing affordability because, and I think some of the other slides that Mr. Carl has presented this evening or will be presenting should identify some of that there's always going to be folks, that are going to have affordability challenges. Most likely you can probably find them almost anywhere. I think another way to potentially look at this is that, it's a positive thing that you have a higher score, a lower impact. And it could mean that maybe the cost associated with implementing a cap to address is going to be a lower overall cost, and you can, benefit. That could be another way to sort of interpret it as well.
Challenge dealing with income measures in Alexandria is many communities have a bell-shaped curve in regards to what their income distribution is. We have barbell shaped curves. And so when you deal with an average, going back to my earlier point, it's like, well, it's interesting, but when you have very wealthy people and very poor people, these kind of numbers mask the real issues in the
The
community.
focus on the LQPI is better.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at the lowest income segment, so it is better.
I mean, granted, it is bimodal, but if you're looking at the lowest quintile, looking at the left side. That's far away.
And I think that like what we're seeing right now is over the last several years, there's been kind of an evolution, and you have different sort of agencies out there, like the Aspen Institute, that have identified a need for better defining what is affordability, measures of that, so that way we can move forward with sort of thinking around that. It's not really well defined. It's still sort of, as sometimes people refer to, the Wild West out there for how you might approach an affordability assessment. It's still very difficult to really define what that is. But I do think that that slide that Mr. Call presented earlier in the evening, it's the same methodology that, for example, the Institute uses as well to kind of define it around, your living costs, your basic living costs. Because we all know, I mean, I definitely started out, right out of college where I was housing burdened at 50% or more. And I remember what that was like, living in those circumstances. I'm not saying I was in the same position as maybe other folks with more significant affordability challenges, but it did give me a sense of what that was like. So yeah, I definitely think that there are probably better ways to kind of think about this. And I'm sure we have a lot of very intelligent people thinking about these types of challenges that over time we're going to start to evolve our thoughts around this. And this is just one evolution with the FCA approaching some of the changes that they made with the LQI in February of this year. I think that there were some folks that were hoping they would have gone far further and they didn't go as far, but.
Next slide kind of highlights that as we use the LQI to look at the percent of annual costs of water, both at the national level and for the city of Alexandria. And for the national level, the water and wastewater bill is approximately $967, which comes out to approximately 3.41% of the LQI on the national level. And then for Alexandria, the water and wastewater bill is approximately 2.34%. The wastewater bill, just including the city sanitary charge, is 1.62%. And that does highlight the water and wastewater cost representative of 2026 estimates, and then the income as presented previously. And then I'll hand it over to Mr. Carl to for the rest of the presentation. Yeah.
Diane, but this is
Yes.
great. Can we just drill down on this one a little bit? I want to make sure I understand it. The data on the top half of that chart, the national picture.
Yep.
That's for the national data. That is the total utility bill.
Correct. Water.
Electrical and all that.
It's just water and wastewater.
Oh, so it's not utility bill, it's just water and wastewater. So the
Correct.
967 is just water and wastewater.
Yes, sir.
Got it. So we are comparing, terrible metaphor, apples to apples here.
Yeah.
Okay.
That doesn't include stormwater, does it?
Yeah,
Sorry, Bill.
that's fine. I was gonna ask.
I don't believe it includes storm.
So I think it's important to keep this slide handy because to Ms. Hammer's point, Mr. Fink's point, Mr. Hill, the bell curve, we actually went through all the census tracts that we have available through the census in Alexandria and looked at the lowest quintile per census tract. We'll show that later in conjunction with the discussion, but just from an overall standpoint, we use this 3.41 as kind of a national average. And then 2.34 were better than the national average when you look at the Alexandria as a whole, but we busted that up into census tracts to try and find if there's certain pockets in Alexandria where we have affordability issues related to this assessment. So it's important to keep this slide handy because we are going to use it a little bit later as well.
It's also a bit of caution about comparing to the national average. I mean, most folks think the national average is too high also. So it's not like we're better than national average. So like we're good. It's too high everywhere. Yeah.
I'm sorry, before you go on, you're probably like, please let me get through this.
No, the whole point is to establish discussion.
The way that we bill customers are we legislatively mandated to bill by usage, or is that just a policy we've always had?
Or I think, Mr. Jenks asked a similar, I think you asked a similar question.
Yeah, so it's
What
the
Ms.
Virginia
Waters said.
Authorities Act. They have a number of factors that can be considered. Usage is one. I can bring up the language, but
We don't need to know it right
it doesn't
now, but
restrict it to
if-
only usage. You can
Right.
look at the type of the household. You can look at,
so if that's something as we move forward and start thinking about building a program, what we're able to do is going to be helpful.
Yeah.
If we can maybe get that at some point.
Also, their statutes, these aren't from the state constitution.
I'm sorry.
And Dylan's rule is around and does limit us. But if you look at the city's legislative package, most of it is related to getting authority in the state code. The city doesn't have. So it's a regular, ongoing, if we think that we want to do something, that getting the code changed, which creates permissive authority for an authority to do something, is not out of the cards for us to.
Sure, but I think it's probably a good place to start is to figure out what we can do.
Absolutely, that's absolutely.
And then determine what we'd like to do and then see what we have to do. Because that's gonna, I think, factor into anything we do, right? Is what's the level of effort and how likely are we to succeed?
Well, she's already text about the factors that can be considered for rates it's in the green folder. It's like on the first page of Mr. Jinx's. I'll get it now.
Thank you.
So I think this slide, we ended the deck tonight with, what are some ideas and what do others do locally and in the region? And I do want to make sure that we make sure that this presentation does take account for what we as AlexRenew currently do for our customers, the economy and affordability, and also what our partners at the city and Virginia American Water also do for, rates and affordability around water. I mentioned in the very beginning of the deck in our policy and planning, we have our financial policy set up. We have a rate policy set up that we put in place before River Renew to make sure that we have fair and equitable rates as we implement this massive program. I think there's two things that haven't been mentioned yet today in this column, and it's our community benefit policy. And one of our policies as AlexRenew, and it's in Ms. Hammer in your three-pronged board packet that we gave you when you onboarded, is a community benefit policy is to really meant for us to return work to a local region. So we make an effort to return work to Alexandria. And a really good example of that to date is our tunnel project Trailer Shay. We've returned about 270 million back into the Alexandria economy through that program. It's a huge number because it's a huge number of expenditures, but a lot of our program, a lot of our expenses go back into businesses here in Alexandria or the greater metropolitan region. And as we know, we've also leveraged some low interest loans to help offset the impacts to rates. On the people side, we're one of the first out of the gate with Promise to distribute LIHWAP funds in Alexandria. I think it was us and HRSD right off the bat. We'll show a slide on that later, what that looked like, but we were already engaged with Promise. We were right out of the gate with Promise to get some of the LIHWAP funds distributed to customers in need here in Alexandria. Our payment plans are currently structured to go up to 48 months. That was something that was put in place during COVID. We've also had one-time bill payment assistance. You'll see on our delinquency slide where we had CARES and ARPA money available, and that was non-discretionary. If you needed help with your bill, you got funding. It didn't have any strings attached to it with respect to your income. We typically waiver late fees on bills. We're currently working with various entities throughout the United States. U.S. Water Alliance is one, just send talking points over to further lobby to make LIHWAP permanent. So that's something that we're also supporting. And then a lot of our work, we do provide enhancements. If you think about our restoration in the community, where we are restoring areas we're putting back a community benefit for our community. Outfall One Promenade, Post Run being riparian buffer improved, and then the area around Royal Street to be returned to natural area. And then as an organization, we have a focus on sustainability. So we reuse water. We also reuse natural gas to power our plant. We have a sustainability focus. We'll be the second tunnel project in the United States for Envision. As buildings LEED, our pumping station will be LEED certified. We try and use solar power where possible. We're looking at smart utility investments for the future. And then we obviously have continuous training for our staff as well. So on the AlexRenew side, you see some other utilities mention that in their programs. I want to make sure that's captured for the board to understand what we do as an organization, to provide additional detail on these.
On the previous slide, don't go back. You do mention payment plans. I assume it's promise pay and that sort of thing. If you're going to get to it later, I'll wait. But at some point, I think we'd all benefit from knowing what payment options are available to somebody who can't pay their bill. Not assistance, but payment plans.
Yeah, I mean, we've offered payment plans for years right now through Promise. Matt, you want to talk a little bit about our current payment plan?
Sure, yeah, there's so the way it works is it's up to 48 months. So somebody can apply for a 12-month, 24, 36, 48-month payment plan. And yeah, it's sort of according to their needs. We have seen quite a few signups, and then we talked about this previously, but like, we'll see 15, 20 people sign up for a payment plan, and then sometimes in the same month, people will either drop off or complete that payment plan. So that line sort of fluctuates pretty dramatically.
No, this is to pay off a balance that someone has already accumulated, right? So it's not to help you pay your bill looking forward. It's just to pay down your debt that you've already accumulated.
So you can only qualify for a payment plan if you have a delinquent.
And you still have your regular bill.
Is that how folks generally use the promise pay? Let's say, pretend I'm a delinquent.
Sure.
Probably easy to do. I have $1,000 I haven't paid, and my monthly bill is $70
Yep.
for my water usage. Put $1,000 into the 48-month payment plan, but I still have to pay $70 a month. I can't put that $70 into the 48-month payment plan, can I?
So we see a few scenarios. Sometimes people just say they don't want a payment plan. They call, they make a large payment and then continue paying their bill, and they sort of do their own thing. That does happen. More often than not, when somebody has the option of 48-month payment plan, they're choosing 12-month or 24-month option. And then they're not putting necessarily a huge payment down. They're just paying that month's installment along with their current bill. And they continue to do that moving forward. So they just pay the monthly installment and their current bill.
So it's not really helping me with my monthly payment. It's helping me with.
That's right. It's in addition to your
past.
in addition to your monthly payment, you're now paying your payment plan amount.
Do monthly payments, are they generally the same or do they fluctuate? I'm assuming they fluctuate with the seasons, right? Like potentially.
They're generally pretty consistent. We have the winter average, which we talked about previously.
You mean fluctuations like the number of?
I guess I'm thinking about like
Actual
your
bill,
water
how many
dollars, right? So like in the summer when you're watering your garden, your water bill is
Based on
up,
the winter
right?
average. So when it fluctuates,
So it's okay.
usually pretty consistent. If you don't get penalized for watering your garden because it's not going in. That's the easiest way to explain it. We've opened a can of worms now a few times at these meetings. I don't want Terry to go there. AlexRenew, the other piece is AlexRenew. PAD has, we use the old logo on this one, an affordability program set up in 2015 and endorsed by the board at that time. I think there's 2 members still on that board that were part of the water fund. But initially, this was set up to fund customers in need through donations and fundraising activities. It was endorsed in 2017, and then we issued it through a 501c3, the United Way, until 2020. United Way wasn't necessarily interested in continuing to be the representative of that 501c3. So it kind of, the last 3 years went into dormancy. We talked a little bit about this at our previous meeting on the subject, but really to make this water fund happen again. And there are some utilities who do this. HRSD is one of them. Prince William County is one of them. I point to Lake because he just came from there. To make this a realization, if this was something the board wanted to pursue, we need to create a 501c3 or find a Salvation Army, Alice, similar to be able to accept these donations to assist with a fund. And then that at the time we had absorbed and ran the administrative costs out of our organization. So I think at the time, AlexRenew also, it's important to note, did not have an ability to an opt-in program or a roundup program on their bill. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but we will have that ability on our upcoming, what's it called?
Customer care portal.
Thank you. Upcoming customer care portal migration starting early next year, actually November of this year, or a little early. So we will have the ability then to do a roundup program or an opt-in where we can take donations. It has to go to a fund somewhere and then can be used for affordability. That's what some other utilities are doing right now. I do want to mention that water fund isn't necessarily completely gone, but we do need to find a 501c3 or a way to be able to take that fund and then get it to a customer's need.
How much did we raise and how much did we disperse in that 4-year period?
It wasn't a lot of money because it was all based on donations, $20-some thousand. That I remember, Allison,
How was it dispersed?
through the United Way.
I mean, so did people come and ask for help? Was it you're delinquent? So we're putting, like, how was it decided who got what?
My understanding is that customers in need approach United Way and we're distributing the funds. Our money just funded that program through United Way, and that happened as well. Up until while AlexRenew was doing shutoffs, that still happened through United Way. Some other communities with their 20 to 30 a month, where some of the various nonprofits in Alexandria were assisting customers in need, absent funding from AlexRenew. So that was something that we know was happening because we get a payment all of a sudden in our customer portal from United Way or another entity that was paying off somebody else's bill. That's the way it kind of worked at the time.
Ad hoc community emergency fund.
Yeah.
Which is common for various kinds of needs. A question for those utilities that have gone to the roundup, what's their experience been in the sense of, you'd have to probably, because utilities are all sizes, on a per 1,000 customer basis, how much did they get a month? Or, I mean, what?
It really varies. As Mr. Carl said, we get the donation and it's being managed by the 501c company. They deal directly with the customer and go through their need assessment. But overall, it's been really low down. We haven't seen a lot.
I'd be interested to see if we go before we go that route, kind of Jim's question, but how much what's the yield going to be?
We just kind of look at, Prince William's one example, HRSD is another example that use the roundup program. Something we can certainly look into. But after trying to pry LIWAP information from people, it was a little challenging over the last few weeks. But yeah, we can look into seeing how our partners are doing with respect to roundup.
Do you know if any of the utilities that used that in addition to roundup went for foundation money or other types of money?
I'm sorry, say other utilities.
So in addition to the roundup, do you know if any of the other utilities have gone after foundation money or other types of income for that fund, or is it?
Donations is the biggest one we've seen. Like WSSC is a good example where there's donations coming in to a roundup fund, like it's literally called the water fund. And they accept donations and they also have the roundup portion of the bill. So it's funded from a couple different ways. I think we have getting ahead of ourselves, some more interesting ways to create a fund. I think we do. than that, but it's also defining how much we need, and that's kind of where the next part of the presentation is going to go.
With this approach is just that it can be very inconsistent how much you get.
Sure.
So that makes it hard to plan for how you're gonna operate a program. You know, it's all voluntary.
I will say, as someone who spoke with folks that were involved in some of these programs, one of the, I mean, not to knock it 100%, because I think that there is some good work being done by, for example, the United Way when they're looking at it more holistically, because they'll sometimes go through, financial education to help individuals out. So they kind of can look at it from a few different things and blend this together with that. And that can help people get to a better state in combination. Because sometimes folks will, as the folks at the United Way could probably tell you, will just go around the city and go to different organizations, to ask for assistance, and they're not dealing with maybe some of the root causes. And so some of these organizations that are out there, it's not necessarily a bad thing to consider them partners. So just a different perspective on that particular.
I feel like in conjunction with
Yeah.
some other options.
The other piece is just the other part of the pie in the city is, what our water partners are doing. So Virginia American Water has $1 energy payment assistance program. They also distribute LIWAP. We do not have the numbers for LIWAP in BAW. The state, not BAW. And they also help with water audits and leak assistance. The city, and this is not comprehensive, supported us with distributing our LIWAP and CARES funds. They helped us with the outreach on that. We know there's senior rental relief, there's stormwater utility credits, backflow prevention program, flood mitigation grants, and then the city also brings some legislative strength to the table to be able to assist with the GA or any federal funds that could be available. All right, so getting back to an early point Ms. Hammer made is we're going to talk a little bit about LIWAP. We're going to talk about how successful LIWAP was in the state of Virginia, how successful it was in Alexandria. I just want to start off by the LIWAP program is really here to help customers with sewer payments, especially those that are in potentially risk of being disconnected. And be a threshold that's 150% below the federal poverty level. So now we're starting to talk about below the lowest quintile that Ms. Ling presented. We're below that quintile. So a number we were looking around here is the $30,000 a month of income type, not the $49,000 that we're looking at before. So it's 150% below the federal poverty level. And what that looks like for household size is shown here on monthly gross income. And at the top, and I drew a line here as well, is that when you look at Alexandria's lowest quintile, we have about $50,000 a year, which is the 20th percentile quintile overall in Alexandria. When you look at the LIWAP, your numbers generally are falling well below that. So we have a gap between what LIWAP cover and what we might need from an affordability program. Better explained maybe on the next slide. So as I mentioned, census data, there's so much information around our fingertips. We put together, we estimate how many households in Alexandria would benefit from an affordability program, either implement as a whole or can touch households, and also those that we can directly reach with our bill. So what we did is we looked at what we said were LIWAP funds. These people would be covered by LIWAP should they know about the program, apply, and get approved. This is the first row, up to 34,000. It's a rough estimate because it aligns with the census data as well. But renter-occupied households, this is the burden number. They're burdened at that income by their cost of living. And then that's the total number. So anywhere between 75 to 8,000 households that would qualify for LIWAP. Owner occupied, about 1,330 to 1,500. This group could largely be covered by a permanent LIWAP type program. We'll show how LIWAP did in Virginia and in Alexandria as well. But that gives you an estimate. And then the gap that I mentioned, up to that kind of $50,000 a month, going back to the Alice slide for a one-person household, somebody burdened at $50,000 a month. Looking at renter occupied units, about 3,000 burdened, 3,300 total, and then 890 to 1,200 for owner occupied housing. Those are people we can touch directly. So I would circle that number. And then when you look at the total, about 11,300 for renter, 2,700 for owner, for a total of just around $15,000 households in Alexandria that could be covered by some sort of assistance, either LIWAP or what we have in a gap between LIWAP and that Alice threshold. We're trying to use Alice because it also aligns with the median household income in Alexandria. Mr. Hill.
I'm trying to square those estimates. Granted, those are back of the envelope estimates, I understand.
No,
They're estimates.
that's data. Straight from Sun.
You're saying that potentially eligible.
Correct. Yeah, I think the number to keep in mind is when we looked at the census data, they don't give you every single household income. They give you 34 and below. And then 35 to 49. That aligns with our lowest quintile, also aligns with our one-person household. Anything below that 34 would be LIWAP. That's what we're saying.
I'm taking it one step further. Assuming, probably incorrectly, that it could be eligible. I'm saying, what if they were entirely eligible? And that looks like it adds up to 11, 12, 13,000 households. Am I reading that right?
Some sort of assistance.
14,000.
That would be if income were the only
Right.
eligibility.
Right. And then holding it up against the data that appears on page 14, the households that receive a bill from AlexRenew, renters and non-renters and so forth.
Yeah, well, don't forget Alexandria also has a lot of retirees that might not be taking income that are reflected in these numbers. So we noted that here. That's potentially throwing off our numbers as well. But again, this is census data. We're trying to put thoughts around maybe who could benefit, who should benefit for LIWAP, what should we have from a household standpoint, and where do we have a gap that LIWAP didn't cover?
The YWAP expires in 10 days. And I don't think we should count on it being extended in the near future, maybe even the medium future, based on how legislative advocacy has been going on that issue. So I would just recommend that we consider that total line and not write off, because the top line, the lowest income, those are the people that need the most help. And if we're assuming that only the middle row are the people who are going to be covered by a potential program that we operate, then we're like leaving out the people who need it. So I want to consider it too. I just don't think we can count. Hope I'm wrong.
Given the state of the federal budget right now, that's probably a reasonable assumption.
We're about to shut down. So.
But
I think what we're noting in Alexandria is that Alexandria's cost of living is so high that it does create a gap that LIWAP didn't cover.
This is helpful.
And granted, I understand you're working with the data you have, but I'm looking at the renter occupied household column. Those are big numbers, right? 10 to 12,000 households. Can we reach them? The rentals.
I don't have an answer at the moment for that. I know
And
that
I think I know what the answer is.
It's not, it's hard, but it's not impossible.
It's complicated.
Yeah, but you could do it.
DC Water has a affordability program for specifically for multifamily. I'm sure we're getting way ahead.
it's in the deck.
Okay, I'll wait till you get to that part of the story.
We end with it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Again, more data to kind of see where we are. This kind of starts off our delinquency discussion too, and I think we took a couple deep dives into this. So we're gonna go into delinquencies, to show you some potential options for affordability, and then takeaways, and then move on with our meeting. But we wanted to go back through and look at the history of delinquencies at AlexRenew. And I think back in 2016, we had delinquencies approaching $1 million. And for one of the first times in the organization's history, AlexRenew implemented shutoffs in November 2016 after a 4-year lapse. And I think before that, we were on quarterly bills and also transitioned billing from Virginia American Water to AlexRenew somewhere in that period too. So 2016 was the best data we could find. What happened after shutoffs is we saw a steady decline over 2 years after shutoffs were implemented, and it dropped down to a low around $100,000 a month and kind of hung out there until COVID hit in January 2020. So in January 2020, we were at a low somewhere just around $100,000 a month for delinquencies. We suspended the disconnections in March 2020, and then we had the executive order prohibiting disconnections all the way through September 2021 through the state, and we saw delinquencies rise steadily over that time. When we issued CARES Act funding, and I think it's somewhere around 500 grand.
Yes,
Like,
yeah, approximately.
with CARES and ARP funds, we did see a little dip. And those CARES and ARP funds weren't just for people who needed, they just were for anybody who wanted to help with paying their bills. We did see a big dip when CARES funds went out. And since then, we've just continued to see our delinquencies rise to the point where we are today, and this matches what's in the CEO report this evening. October 2022 is when we started LIWAP. We didn't see you'll see the number. We didn't see a change in delinquencies with respect to LIWAP. So this data is helpful. I think knowing coming ahead, we will have a new customer system portal going in November 2023. This also helps frame this, combined with some of the additional data, will help form a picture around delinquencies in Alexandria. What might be people who can pay and aren't paying versus those who can't pay. I think that helps put some framework around that, and also helps us think about what's the right number for an affordability program moving forward. I don't know the answer to that, but I look at the data and it may be somewhere in that range. I'm not sure, kind of for inflation looking ahead a few years, but it's not the delinquency value I think we're seeing today, and we've got some additional grounds to support that. So delinquencies, matches the board report tonight. 26,710 accounts. Right now we're 1,008 delinquent. We're going down. Thank you, Matt and team, for all the effort we've been doing in the community with our flyers. 67 LIWAP accounts in Alexandria for about $56,000. And then 145 of those delinquent accounts are commercial. So when we look at the value, again, this is numbers we report every month. About 60% of our value comes through residential, about $650,000. The remainder, about $500,000, comes through commercial accounts or those multimedia accounts, for a total of about 1.15 million. That's today, that's August numbers.
Are those all current accounts or some of them inactive?
The only thing that's different on this than the board report is we showed out of the residential greater than 60 days, how many of those residential were helped by LIWAP. It's a very small number.
Most of the commercial delinquencies really related to the COVID era. They're just in the process of being in a long payment plan to pay off, or we seeing more commercial, basically multifamily properties delinquent than half of it.
From the snapshot commercial, I'm not sure, Mr. Jenks, we'd have to get back to you on that.
I mean, it's hard to compare just because the last 3 years have sort of been impacted by COVID. I don't think people ever got off of, being in a delinquent status that were commercial customers. So it's sort of carry over, I would say. It's kind of anecdotal though.
We can look into it.
Yeah.
Couple things going on the slide. I guess there was a question in the last board meeting, how are other municipalities in Northern Virginia doing with respect to delinquencies? So thank you if they're watching this, which I don't think they are, but thank you for helping us out with the data. Thank you, Fairfax County. Jerome helped us out get data. But we looked at Arlington, Fairfax, and Prince William from a delinquency standpoint. All of those utilities have reconstituted disconnections within the last 2 years. More recently, Arlington and Prince William, AlexRenew has not, for reasons discussed previously. And then we're showing in this table for our region is the number of accounts, how many delinquencies those utilities currently have, the value, and then what's the percent of accounts that are delinquent. And I'll start with AlexRenew. When we look at our numbers, I left the old number in here, I'm sorry, from last month. We're somewhere around 5% delinquent accounts. And that trends pretty well with the region, with the exception of Loudoun, where they have about 2.3% of their accounts delinquent. Prince William, 6.5%. Fairfax is about 5%. When you look at us from a size standpoint, you know, us and Arlington are about the same size, same customers, and you know, about 1.5% off on the delinquency.
So you showed in one of the previous slides what appeared to be the effectiveness of shutoffs. From 2015 or 16, we started doing the shutoffs. It went down to 100,000 approximately for a while, and then COVID hit. The world exploded. What I don't guess I'm seeing with this, and maybe you didn't ask, and that's fine, is what the effectiveness of shutoffs were for other counties. So Fairfax looks like it's had shutoffs for 2 years now, but they've still got a really high delinquency value. So I guess I'm trying to get my head around that.
I think Fairfax serves a greater area as well. It's 2 million people compared to our
Well, it's a percentage though.
1,000. But
I think what we would need to know is what their rate was before they reinstituted shutoffs to know if it brought it down or not.
I think we didn't.
Yeah.
To compare previous to now, I just know what our trend has been.
And we probably find out, we work with Fairfax County as well with Bill, and I know that it has come up, these delinquency accounts, and some of them are like, over several years old. They just haven't been written off yet and probably need to be cleaned up. So there could be an element to this that could be related to that. But I can assure you that, like, generally speaking, when you implement shutoffs, payment is very high across the industry, because what will happen is you're reprioritizing someone's budget, and water is an essential need. So by virtue of that, you're going to see delinquency rates go down pretty effectively. But the other kind of consideration here that we've seen, and not to steal Mr. Carl's thunder, is that generally from the studies we do, we're also finding that delinquency doesn't necessarily correlate with income constrained individuals. A lot of times it's just basically people are lapsing in their payment, not because they can't afford it, other reasons. It could be for convenience. We've even heard sometimes for some folks that are on the affluent end of the spectrum, it's a small percentage, so it's not representative of the broader, but it could be because they want to wait until they build up a certain amount before they make payment, is what we've been told by some of our clients. It's pretty ridiculous. So I guess it's important to understand that there's not always a direct correlation between it, although the folks that have affordability challenges will, on average, tend to have a higher rate of delinquency. So it's a population within a population, if you will.
Sure, and I think that to a certain degree was shown when the shutoffs started in 2015, that we were right. So I'm cognizant of that. I guess what I'm trying to understand is what's the lag time, right? So if we're trying to figure out who really can't afford it, and we start instituting shut-offs again, like what's the lag time where we get to a point where the folks that can afford it have already paid it off, and now the people that are still there, we can potentially make an assumption that they're not getting paid off because they can afford it kind of thing. Just kind of trying to think about, as if we're thinking about a program, is that something that is helpful for us to figure out who really can and can't?
I can tell you that in utilities in some other states that resumed shutoffs shortly, I would say within less than 12 months after, the onset of COVID, which some of the utilities that we worked with had been doing that, they did see pretty rapid drop-offs and the delinquency balances. It's a highly effective tool at reducing delinquencies. So I would imagine that you would probably see, if you resume shutoffs, that would probably come down pretty quickly, as people work through payment plans and things like that. And, depending on what the balance is and depending on what you're doing, that's where maybe the 4-year option might make, could be advantageous for folks too. But yeah, yeah, there's more to say, but I think that.
Well, what we said, so there are people who can afford to pay and don't, but I think there's probably some number of people that are struggling to pay but still do. We don't want to confuse delinquency with affordability.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly right.
I wanted to add, when Prince William County started their shut-ups, the sewer delinquency and balance was roughly around 800,000. And you could see where that number is as of today. The shut-off already instituted, just to put some context in place.
Mr. Carl, on the map under Loudoun County, there's a note that says LQ.
There's an old comparison. So there's two things going on in this map, right? We showed the delinquencies to answer the question from the last meeting, but we also tried to show how LIWAP did throughout the state of Virginia. This is useful for us to see if LIWAP was successful. It was. If you look at Northern Virginia, ignore the LQ. You try bringing those households below 35K again using the census data. Loudoun, for example, 8396, AlexRenew 9515, and you can see how LIWAP performed in our communities. AlexRenew 56,000, 67 accounts. Loudoun 12176, 40 accounts, and the LQ, to answer your question, is the lowest quintile for Loudoun County compared to our $49,000. When you look at Richmond and HRSD on how they perform with respect to LIWAP, when you look at their regions they serve, we have a lot more households that were under 35,000 in HRSD, about 145,000 households. They were able to touch 9,500 accounts through Promise, the same organization we do in Alexandria, and about $6.5 million distributed to their customers for HRSD, using the same means that we had here in Alexandria. When you look at Richmond, about 103,000 potential accounts would qualify for LIWAP, and you can see how they did. They hit about 1,858 accounts for a total of about $2 million in Richmond. And Allison did some research on LIHEAP, which is similar to LIWAP, and typically LIHEAP, over its 40-year performance history, I did remember this, has touched about 8% of customers, and that's kind of reflected in the numbers that we saw for the communities where we saw LIWAP more successful than we did in Northern Virginia. Roanoke got into the game a little bit late. They were able to hit 450 accounts, about 62,000. Again, it's a good takeaway for seeing how LIWAP performed. We know it didn't perform well in Alexandria, but it did help some of those in need in other parts of the state.
Did we only get 56,000 from LIWAP, or
Promise
that?
only distributed about 56,000 through Virginia. Who was it? Department of DHS. Promise of DHS worked to distribute the funds. 56,000 to 67,000 distributed.
That doesn't mean that was the total amount available. That was
21 million was available for the state, a pot of money.
Got it.
That got distributed. as it was available.
The state had or been able to, I'm not sure whether it was a state or federal decision regarding income levels. It said Northern Virginia is a higher cost of living, a higher cost of rent. We're going to have a higher income number to be eligible for life. I think we would have seen more people apply. The problem was they tried to make one size number fits all. And anytime the state does that, Northern Virginia ends up on the short end of the stick.
Yeah, because I'm looking at HRSD. I mean,
Right.
look at the,
And I think we saw that, Mr. Jinks, with the CARES funds and the ARP funds. You know, we did much better with CARES and ARP because it was completely unrestricted to income. You know, $500,000 compared to 56,000. So again, I think that's again a takeaway showing that, you know, where you have households in need, Lilac was more successful there than it was in Northern Virginia. So getting back to our delinquency, which changes here, as I mentioned, keep in mind the EPA Financial Capability Index. So this is what we've got, right? This is what we have from the census. This is GIS. We can go into various census tracts in Alexandria and at least try and target. I think Ms. Hammer put this in her memo and an email to us. You know, just because an area looks affluent doesn't mean there's people in need in those areas. We're trying to find out where are there people in need in Alexandria? And then what we wanted to do is overlay that with our delinquencies to see if we had any trends. So what we're showing here is back to what Ms. Ling presented earlier in the deck. And these are the EPA financial capability indices broken up from 0 to 1%. This is based on the LQI in that specific census tract. So they change. So when you take our wastewater and wastewater numbers and divide it by that LQI, these values change. So we have a range from anywhere from 0 to 9%. The areas shown in yellow are about the national average that we presented on the previous slides. And then anywhere we see red or orange, they're above the national average. So out near Landmark Mall, we have 3-4 areas out there. And then our Landria, we also have an area higher. So if we had delinquency, delinquencies primarily driven by affordability, we'd expect to see pockets concentrated in those areas. We bring up the delinquencies on the next slide. These are 60 days and over, and I think we put a threshold of $250. And pink dots are our residential customers. The triangles, the gold triangles are our commercial customers. And we see a focus of commercial customers within Old Town where we have delinquent accounts as well as residential. Not much in Delray and Rosemont, and then out Duke Street, you tend to see some more residential delinquencies, but we didn't see huge pockets with the exception of our Landria, which we've been working with very closely, some of those commercial accounts up there over the past few months to get some of those delinquencies paid down. The other piece is we do have an entire delinquent community here in Brookville. There are some of those households that do qualify for LIHWAP. So that might be an area that's not reflected because of the LQI in that area is trended higher than what we're showing. So when you pull up LIHWAP and see where people qualify for LIHWAP, should be blue boxes. And here you can see where a LIHWAP is contributing. Some communities in Old Town, Southern Landria, and then that Brookville neighborhood, we have some LIHWAP accounts. So, I know it's not, you look for clusters, that might be a cluster where we have an affordability issue, but for the rest of the city, with the exception of our Landria, we're not seeing delinquencies and potentially looking at EPA's financial capability index as a driver for our delinquencies. You know, we think that given our past history at AlexRenew, given the slide I showed earlier, delinquencies are primarily due to non-payment for various reasons. We've been out in the community over the past 4 months trying to get the word out to sign up for payment plans. And we have received a few customers just go off and pay off the bill in full at that time. So we're trying to hit our top accounts moving through this sort of time where we're not able to do shut-offs and we're really focused on getting the word out till we transfer our customer report. That's the piece on delinquencies. Bringing it home, we did look at some different ways to come up with funds for the, and this is kind of, again, additional information and data to get everybody talking and thinking. We talked about the Roundup program. We've got donations. We will have the ability through our new billing system to do a Roundup program. Some other areas that we thought of outside the box is AlexRenew's assets and the land it sits on are not taxed by the city. So we looked at doing a pilot program of payment in lieu of taxes where we would enter into an MOU with the city. Potentially have a charge on some of AlexRenew's parcels. That would get, those funds would get deposited into a fund that would solely assist customers with their sewer bill, and it would, be in partnership and administered through the city. Another idea we have is the city has tap fees where developers come in to tie into the sewer system. Those tap fees could either supplement that fund or use on their own to help with sanitary sewer charge. And then we also had an idea of a city-funded LIWAP replacement program, getting to Ms. Hammer's point, that LIWAP might not be around, where we have a fund administered by the city, finance the general revenue, and then assists with all water costs. So a couple ideas for, again, this is how can we get to funds?
That's a question on the last one. So, I noticed that like a rate funded program is not on the list. Was it determined that that is not within our authority to establish?
That has not been tested in the courts. You look at the Authorities Act, it lays out, I sent you the factors, but they are in Mr. Jink's memo, lays out the factors that can be considered. The General Assembly could have said, and other factors, they didn't. So I don't know that AlexRenew would want to be the test case for that, given that it is a Dillon rule state and they would interpret it to be a narrow authority, but it hasn't been tested.
Payment in lieu of taxes. So you're saying AlexRenew doesn't pay city taxes? Or is it the other way around? Property taxes. So the proposal is that AlexRenew would pay some taxes, but that tax money would be used specifically to help people pay for their rates.
You
But
essentially get to Ms. Hammer, same goal without going through the.
But my question is, aren't we essentially just forgiving it? Because if we're now paying taxes that we didn't, paying funds that we didn't pay before.
And then we would subsidize those in need through that fund. Was the idea.
The city theoretically could use those funds that are paid to it for any purpose. It doesn't have to in turn.
I guess I'm thinking, how does that affect our budget in general?
We did.
Yeah, we did it.
I think that what we said is it would be, if you just did everything, all the assets. Which we wouldn't need because it creates a massive pot of money. Way more than we would need. I think it's a $6 million hit just for the, Terry, I'm going off the cuff here. Like 6 million. And then you look at it based on residential, I think would drop, so like it would create 3.5 million a year if you looked at every single set as a whole, not just like remote parcels, not just a plant. If you looked at everything as a whole, I think it was like 3.5 million a year. It would generate a fund, which is way more than we would need. But that would kind of be then included and passed through in our rates and budget.
I think what we find in payment in lieu of taxes, I know at least the housing authority gives the city a payment in lieu of taxes, but it's just a number the housing authority is able to get in their HUD budget. It has no relationship at all to the value of a housing authority property. And I think we looked at, I think Goodwin House makes payment with taxes for one of their wings for reasons go back 30 years. And it is not based on that. So I think it's just an amount to negotiated with the city.
So we could
A
determine,
number of places.
so we could determine, here's the number of accounts that, need assistance, here's how many dollars we would need, and then that would be the payment to the city, right? Like, we would basically set the level of the payment in order to cover the need. And then give it to the city. Is that the idea?
That was the idea. I mean, it's based on, we did a rough calculation based on
Yeah,
assets.
you would want to
We have to
make sure that
work with
they're kind of technically separate. And that that the payment to the city would not exceed whatever the payment in lieu of calculation would support, which we would need to validate, the methodology that we would want to rely on. And the test would be if AlexRenew was a private entity, what taxes would they pay? How would you levy the property taxes on them? And you could theoretically calculate that. We did a back of the envelope calculation. Justin is correct. I think we were based on those allocable to the retail customers, we roughly estimated in the $4 million range. On a higher level, it'd be more, but we wouldn't apply that to the county, obviously. So the payment in lieu of would be only on their retail assets, but we think you might be able to justify up to that level, which would, likely well be in excess of whatever demand out there for a program you could probably get based on some of the values. I mean, if we assume $800 a year roughly, and we were to take 14,000, that's about $11.2 million a year if you covered 100% of their bills for all of the folks that theoretically qualify on an income basis alone. But the participation rate, if you were to think about that, you're probably going to have more than adequate funds with something like that. But there has been some papers that have been issued on legal pathways for customer assistance programs. Likely you've read that. And so this was one of the early ideas to sort of help those that might want to implement a policy around that, come up with a funding mechanism if the general fund didn't have one already. But it's important to just try to remember that you want to kind of keep them sort of independent and separate so that they're,
And granted, you could keep it independent.
Yeah.
From an accounting point of view.
Right.
The fact remains, that's rate revenue, right? And it's not going to be a surprise to anybody.
correct. Yeah. Yes.
Wonder about legal vote. But these are certainly
These are concepts that have to be thought through.
very careful. Got one more slide, right?
Again, the question comes up, and this can be more of a takeaway. Slide, but what do some others do? We talked about Prince William, they talked about the program for a 501c3 to distribute those funds. Hampton Roads has something similar to Salvation Army. Richmond has a Medicare water program where they use their general fund as a nation to distribute money. And we tried, one of the things we also tried to do here, that 34,000 probably isn't off from what we came up with. Because if you look at some of these numbers, with the exception of DC Water, their numbers are right around that 30, at least in Virginia, right around that $35,000 a year income. DC Water has 3 tiers for a customer assistance program. 2-person households at $62.91 and $113. They look at about an $85 a month discount for the first 3,000 gallons used. $22.5 for the second tier, 91,000. It's a 56 discount for 2,250 gallons used. And then if they're at the higher threshold, their household is 75% off, which is like $14 a month. When we talked about the multifamily piece, DC Water does have a multifamily assistance program. They do not do this alone. They work through DOEE to be able to get the participation verified through the District Department of the Environment, or they also work with Department of Human Services. And what that's intended to do is to get participating owners to reduce the amount of rent due by the amount of water, the tenant's share of that water use. Assistance is typically same for each unit. A credit gets posted to the property owner's account. They pass that credit on to the qualifying tenant's residential account at 80%. That's what DC Water is doing, but again, it's not done in a vacuum. It's done through existing programs with the district. And then WSS.
We're on that intriguing solution from DC Water. Now, is that just for wastewater treatment, or does that cover a variety of water-related expenses?
DC Water does it, the water and sewer.
Water too, with
Just DOE does stormwater. And then, as I mentioned, WSSC has a water fund similar to what we have new. And then they also have a customer assistance program, but that is administered through an energy program. If you think about, I mentioned LIHEAP earlier, trying to leverage what exists already. So it's administered by the Maryland Office for Home Energy Programs. And that's really up to $112 per year to help with the fixed fee on the water and sewer bill. That they're looking at just the fixed fee on their bill. One of these was important. I want to make sure it's clear. HRSD is any utility bill. It's not just an HRSD program, but it's any utility bill. H2O, other, any utility bill for HRSD. The rest are focused on water and sewer. All right. Just some major takeaways from tonight from what we showed. We're within the norms for national. Right now, looking at 2026. National metric. Right now, our rates are about 1% of household, customers get bills. We've got some programs that we currently implement at AlexRenew, and we start thinking about ways to supplement them. I do want to mention, we didn't talk a lot about this tonight, but whatever we do implement, we would have a burden internally that would also cost more as well to implement. We don't want to implement a customer assistance program that costs as much as it does to implement as the benefit those receive. So we need to be very cognizant about. That's why I see a lot of these other utilities looking for existing programs to kind of work through and navigate. I think that's something that's known and seen. So we need to be cognizant about that. And it's, you know, Matt and his department not doing it all themselves. We think that delinquencies are primarily based on the data driven by our suspension and disconnections. And, you know, as I said, I already mentioned this, but leveraging those existing federal city programs to assist with water as well. We already talked about how we could change it.
Before we turn that slide off, and I promise to be brief. But first, I want to applaud the tremendous amount of work your team did. This is encyclopedic in its level of detail. Sorry. Now, about that third bullet. Most Alexandrians do not receive a direct bill. Going back to slide on 14, you don't have to go back. 68% of our households do not get a bill. What does that tell us about this problem? That we create a relief program and this 2/3 of the target.
I don't.
We're gonna have to do some. We have to figure a lot of things out.
It would just have to be designed with that in mind.
I think that's the point of making the slide exists to say that we can't just have a program that only helps those who get a bill from us, right? What we need to think, and that's why we ended with the examples, we need to think about what are some other ways to get relief to those through rentals? We haven't talked to housing in 5 years, so we're not with the city housing in 5 years since we started River Renew, but there might be some way to leverage something they're doing or somehow get money back to the renters. You know, DC Water did something interesting with DOEE, but you know, I'm not quite sure, and we tried to read about it, how that actually works.
There's also been some proposals. I don't know the extent to which they've been implemented. This issue's been studied a lot in California because it's a major issue out there as well. And I know that they were proposing to address it through like a tax rebate for renters that would be equivalent to the discount that they would have gotten off a bill had they received a bill. So there's different policy mechanisms that can be used. And so I don't think we should assume like, oh no, we can't do it. I think it's more like, how can we do it?
I volunteer. We all volunteer and serve the needy. There is real affordability problems in the city. I see it every week when I do volunteer work. Just thinking, how do we reach them? And I think as a leader in this community, and AlexRenew is a leader in this community, we have to help solve this problem. I don't believe we can solve it alone. Data tells me we cannot solve it alone. We have got to partner with other agencies, programs. The water drop on the other page. Nobody pays their bill in isolation, right? We've got stormwater fees, connection fees, the American fees. All of them are related to the cost of water. So I think this is great in setting the stage. Probably creates more questions than it answers, but it's got us thinking in the right direction.
No question. Going back to your option slide, more going with city tap fees. I know Fairfax County, Terry, I know you're aware of this. For our availability and connection fees, there's a lot of limitations about what we can use that money for, like where it can go, part of our budget and stuff like that. Have you talked to folks at the city of Alexandria? Limitations?
We haven't yet, I think. I don't know, we didn't talk to Aaron about it. I don't know, you know, it can be used in Alexandria, but we haven't gone back. It was just an idea as a funding source that could potentially be used.
And these are part of the city's enterprise fund, and they all go to the county. I don't think there's a state statute or even a local ordinance that says that they couldn't have some other use. But I think it's given their infrastructure needs on sewer are substantial as well, and take money out of there. I think they'd have to replace it with something else. So I think I guess it's a conversation, but it ain't going to go very far. A better conversation with the city, besides some of the payment of taxes, some other options would be just, the city has the ability under health and welfare statutes to write checks, or we create all sorts of programs that benefit low-income people, and that's the most likely source of any city assistance, would just be getting an appropriation that goes somewhere, based on lots of pathways to get to people, and have the city pay for it, including potentially, as I mentioned in my memo, putting having a credit line on our bill that's the city's credit line, not our money, but like we're putting the city's sewer bill on our bill. Credit on the bill, and see if the city would pay for it. I think that's an option we're considering as well.
Well, this was meant to be educational, and clearly it was. Mr. Carl, how would you like to proceed? I have ideas and I'd like to sort of do a quick survey of the board. Is there a way we could keep this topic on the agenda next month? Just, again, not have you prepare anything. That would not work. maybe just have it on as a discussion topic. And in the meantime, board members. Study this carefully. Think about it. Anybody wants to write policy? White paper. We know how to share it now, thanks to Counselor. And maybe set aside a little bit of time for discussion at the next meeting, not of no more than an hour or so, but just to keep the issue percolating. Because I think we're not going to solve this problem in 1 or 2. Okay. That sound like a way forward? Counselor, we're okay to send emails either to me directly or to Mr. Carl directly, as long as we follow the protocol you mentioned.
I'd say one more thing about the Authorities Act in that I would love to know the answer to the question of whether we have more flexibility. I don't want AlexRenew to take on that risk of legal action. But the General Assembly can request an opinion from the Attorney General. And if we could find somebody who'd be willing to request that, to get an interpretation. And if the interpretation is that there is no flexibility to do it, that same member of the General Assembly may be willing to introduce legislation to amend the Virginia Authorities Act. So it's consideration to get it answered one way or the other.
I'm not sure if you're. Okay. Fundamental issues.
I do think it would be helpful to get an answer relatively soon, though, because it is so fundamental to what we're able to do under current law that it's gonna like frame the options that are on the table.
It doesn't have to be AlexRenew to one of the state groups and see if others would like to know the answer. Others that have connections, the FAMWA.
It's an option to consider. I'm not sure, given the history of correcting Dillon's rules false by getting changes to legislation, that the Attorney General's route isn't to general localities, just go right to the General Assembly members. And I think our delegation, if we said we'd like to be able to do this, given their general political philosophy, I think would say, yeah, I think we can find a sponsor directly, as well as getting an opinion on the Attorney General's office is not putting in a quarter in a slot machine and maybe taking your chances.
Yes.
But it takes a long time to get an Attorney General's opinion. And if we wanted to do something this session with the General Assembly, I don't think it could.
Yeah, I think I'll maybe speak up on this, but going to the General Assembly, I think we've got some political capital, and focus on this session is getting the date extended for River Renew. I think that's utmost importance for this session. We didn't get to it yet in the agenda, but we are working on an additional letter to start introducing legislation to extend the mandate to a future period. I think that's where we're focusing our political capital, and we're working in conjunction with the city. It took a few discussions with the mayor and also the city's legislative director to get everybody on the same page about this year. We've got DEQ behind it. So I think this year, our focus is primarily to get that date extended, so we're not hit with penalties come 2025.
I agree with this.
Butters just suggested in terms of getting the Attorney General opinion, but what if we could get like a statewide group to take up a bill, and it's not us pushing toward it, but it's are there any other like utilities that are similarly exploring this idea that would be interested in taking up the lead on it?
They don't want to be
number of utilities. Say Arlington, the county government runs the utilities. There is no utility fund. They're not organized in the sense they don't get their authority the same way we get our authority. So Richmond's the same way.
Yeah.
I think it's the best authority that Virginia VWW. What is it?
Virginia Water Waste Authority Association,
Yes.
VWWA.
Which is the same as the act. Not them. or specifically authorities like us. That would be the right way to. Obviously.
But I want to be very clear. Let's not muddy the water with the work we have in front of the legislature regarding delivery of river revenue.
We will talk to our lobbyist and get a read on that, looking at using the authority association as an avenue. We'll work on that.
Please focus on river revenue.
That is of the utmost importance.
Absolutely. Good. Okay, one more item on the agenda, folks. We are running a little bit late, but it has been a very educational hour and a half or 2 hours. The CEO's report and the outcomes report. Mr. Carr.
I guess a few things. The CEO report looks different. A few highlights without going through the detail. Mr. Jinks, we did put the year-end numbers in as an attachment. Mr. Akankube can go through that, but let me just start off with the CEO report. We got the $90 million grant. We can start drawing on that now, which is wonderful. We're going out for procurement on 2 projects, youth and construction manager at risk. One, we have an information session tomorrow for our solids upgrades. It's about a $30 million project to get our solid systems reliable and upgraded. They're reaching their end of the useful life at 20 years. The other is a project we talked about in the past that RFQ has not gone out yet. Primary improvements. We anticipate that to go out in October, and it's about a $60 million construction project. We do have an information session tomorrow on the solids program.
We're going out for upgrades or maintenance or whatever on our solids processing. Is that separate from, I thought that we were also looking to do kind of a longer term study on.
Part of it. It's the first phase of I'm sorry, trying to rush through it. It's the first phase, short-term improvements to our solid system. There'll be a second phase on what we do with solids, long-term with respect to land application versus looking at some of the newer technologies that might be available. That'll be a second phase of the program. And that's more of a 10-year type study.
Right.
Not a 10-year study, but what we do in the next 10 years.
Right. And when does phase 2 of that, when's that slated to go?
It's done, the study's underway. We're working through alternatives evaluation, what technologies we'd like to identify as potential future technologies for the organization. This is a short-term improvement to get our system reliable, move away from pasteurization and just go straight to digestion. That RFQ went out on the 11th. The information session is tomorrow here. As promised, we outlined our job order contracts also in the CEO report. So there's a table in there outlining our job contracts. These are all less than $500,000, these contracts. The board approved them on previous meeting. Mr. Hill looking for the page. Get to it. On page 2, it shows you the job order contracts that are in the pipeline. We've issued 1, it's for gravity thickener 3, a repair. First, we had to do an assessment cleaning of it. Then we get a quote for the repair. This is all using RS means for costs. And our 3 contractors are FHP, ACE, and PC Construction for those dock contracts. That's happening as well. So I kind of look at this in 2 ways for solids. There's some things that have to happen right now to get our system reliable. And then there's a move to phase 1 plan to move away from pasteurization and straight to digestion. Phase 3 will then be longer term for solids. And what do we do with our solids product in the future? Not yet.
In regards, before we go by, I appreciate very much the year-end close information. That was a question that I raised at the June meeting. Summarize it, we ended up in the fiscal year in really good shape, like almost $7 million, I'd say. My term, not a kind of surplus. 3.9 from revenue, and that's listed in this. our debt service wasn't as much as we thought. That gave us another 2.2, and we had interest earnings. So that's money that'll help the ratepayers either through capital investment or however we decide to allocate it down the road. And as the report indicates, that the fact that we've sold more water, well, in a sense, our customers are using more water, there are more customers using water, probably is more likely, is the right way to say it. So we have, in a sense, are having more billing for more gallons. And if that continues, that's good. That's good news going forward for more usage, general community usage. So it's a relief on our rate increases for a year from now. We'll see.
Thank you, Mr. Jenks. As I mentioned, billing transition, we're ahead of schedule. We initially projected February. We're gonna be ready to go November 1st away from GCWW with our new system. Mr. Robertson will give us an update at the next board meeting on that system. Transition. Two things that are not in the CEO report, you might have seen it in the elevator. 3 of our operators received Quarter Century Awards at BWEA conference last week, also called Water Jam. Rob Holmes, Ron Jackson, Ken Matson, all 3 received 25-year awards for operators from BWEA. I think they were the only operators that received that award this year. So it's a really shows that how you can make a career in wastewater long-term. They're 3 of our supervisors here at the organization. And in addition to that, our chief engineering officer, Alicia Glapion, received the Enslow Hedgepath Award for her outstanding contributions to wastewater in the region. So 2 things to be proud of coming out of Water Jam last week. For River Renew, looking at the report, as I mentioned, for the dashboard.
That those milestones and that award, is that going to be something in social media at some point?
I think they're both already out.
They're already out on LinkedIn? Yep.
It's also in the elevator.
Well, the elevator's fine, but I'm gonna repost something. That's good. That's great news. Thank you.
River Renew, just going back to our previous discussion, we are working right now on a letter to send to the GA. It's a letter giving them an update on the program and asking for support in moving legislation forward in this session to extend the deadline of River Renew. We've gotten support from VDEQ in the meantime, based on our first letter that was sent in April. That was from the director of DEQ. We got support there. Our goal is to get the letter out by the end of the month, and based on previous conversations with the board, it also is accompanied by a flyer showing a lot of the progress. The letter is currently over with the city, asking for their feedback before we get it out next week. Also, we'll distribute a copy to the board before we send it.
What extra time are we asking for?
We're not putting it, in this letter, we're not asking for a specific extension. We're trying to get sponsors for a bill. Once we get those sponsors, we would then work with them to establish a reasonable timeframe.
How much past that? What is it, June 30th, 2025?
July 1st.
July 1st, 2025.
Currently?
Yeah.
90 days. Slipped another 30 since we last sent the letter, which we anticipated.
Where is Hazel now?
He's halfway there. Did you look at the last page of the dashboard? We try to sing it in John Bon Jovi lyrics. Oh, she's halfway there. She's under Jones Point Park. Sorry, it's late. But that's what we've had. They're supposed to sing.
Are you gonna sing it for us?
No, we cannot. I'm tone deaf.
She was in July.
No, she was still in outfall too. We're almost to the river in Jones Point Park. We're stopped right now until mid-October to bring in a booster for we've reached as far as we can go with our current conveyor system. So we have to get a booster into that shaft, and they're also moving the ventilation to the outfall 2 shaft, and then she'll be on her way to outfall 1. So we're a little past halfway at the moment. We're at like station 6, 72, 73, so it's 6,300 feet in, which is a little more than what it says in the report. So we're about to mine under the river.
Is there a word about the listening sessions?
So on my list, we had a good turnout last week at listening sessions. Outfall 1, we had over 40 people attend. Outfall 2 was a little less, around 15. And then host run on Thursday, we had probably about 25 people come through and talk to us about the program. The mayor announced the listening sessions at the council meeting on Tuesday, so that helped with turnout. In addition to that, Mr. Mayor also mentioned the Jameson closure. That's slated for about mid-October, 10/16. Jameson will be closed for about 3 months to bring the host run interceptor across that roadway. We've been doing outreach for the last few months on that, working with the bike folks on our side as well. Pile driving outfall 1 is going to be done in the next few weeks, and then we're going to take a break until spring, April timeframe. We'll come back. We have about 40 more miles to drive. I think that's it for right now.
We go back to, Mr. Carp, we go back to CEO's report, just the financials on page 2.1. The variance on the debt proceeds and the Fairfax County IRR capital contribution. Is that, those just timing issues? Is that just timing?
Yeah, sorry. Looking at Mr. Carl, sorry.
Sorry.
But yes, that's due to a timing issue as of August 31st. We believe, at this point, we should catch up with the budgeted amount. But those are solely driven, like I said, the time when the debt for those projects are actually. So we're a little behind on some of our projects right now, but they're currently in the process to get started and get catch up on. We'll be able to tell later on during the year if we are going to be off on budget, but so far right now, everything, the budgeted amount, we don't see any reason yet to say we are going to be off yet. But again, this is just 2 months.
Because we're early in the
Process, yes, sir.
purely timing and how we
Timing.
staggered it in the budget.
Correct.
No, if this were 10 months in, I'd worry.
Exactly. We'll have a better gauge come mid-year around like December, okay, how we really stack from a debt process standpoint.
And that applies to debt service as well, parity debt.
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you. Thank you all. That's the only question I have. Any questions from the board?
The board does have feedback. On the format of this, we try to make it a little more streamlined, and also I think there's some graphs that didn't make sense to us. Mr. Jenks, I know we asked for your feedback from finance standpoint. This is sort of what we want to see, but we tried to line up the budget. Consider this a work in progress.
I always look at cash reserves and debt service. Always easy to find.
The new logo looks great on these too.
It does. Any other questions for the board? Been a very long meeting, second night in a row. Who wants to make a motion to? Second. On in favor. And again, a real hearty, honest, sincere thank you to the AlexRenew team and all those who helped on this affordability presentation. It is, I'm going to use the word, it's encyclopedic. It touches all the bases, gives us a lot to think about. Very well done and very complete. So thank you very much. Great.